Last year at Layers, we had this incredible start to the conference where we had a speaker give a talk on how to work most effectively with all of Apple's announcements from the day before. He had like 24 hours to put together this talk about what you should do for the iOS 12 launch. Having worked as Apple's partnership manager, he was super good at understanding all the implications of shifting technologies and design standards, and was able to deliver a lot of useful information that was very timely. And on stage, he had joked about how I kind of tricked him into going up first because he didn't really give him a lot of time to prepare. But it worked out really, really well, so I decided to trick him into doing the same thing again this year, so I hope that he doesn't hate me for that. So very, very pleased to announce our first speaker, Akil King.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for having me. This is as Jesse said, my second time at Layers. It's one of my favorite conferences since I've been here. I've had a bunch of friends that have come here over the last 5 years, and when I was at Apple, I wasn't able to attend for the first 3 years, but the last 2 I have. And what Jesse said is true. She did trick me last year into doing this. It was we talked about this concept of going over kind of the announcements from WWDC keynote. But the thing I didn't know is that I was going to be the very first speaker the very next day. So kind of freaked me out last year, and I said I would never do it again. And here I am. So actually, show of hands, how many of you were here last year for Layers? Okay, good amount of people. So if you guys weren't paying attention at all last year, you can stay. If you were paying attention a little bit, you guys are dismissed. So yeah. So no one's leaving. So that means thanks, guys. I'm never coming back. Seriously, I'm never coming back. But no, just kidding. So the idea for this talk is, I worked at Apple as a partnership manager in developer relations for about 8 years, and my job was to basically work with developers to help them build great experiences for iOS, tvOS, and macOS. With that, what we focus on would be, integrating the new technology that gets announced at WWDC, but as well, the best design practices. When I left Apple about 1.5 years ago, I was free to say whatever I wanted, which is great. But also, I realized that when we were at, there's a limited amount of people at Apple that had my job, right? I was the only person for games for a year, then we got another person, but this is for all of games in North America. And so a lot of this information that I knew that we were working with developers one-to-one, giving them this information, it wasn't really getting out to the broad developer community of how to work with Apple, how to position yourself well to have a good app launch. So that's kind of how this talk came about. So if you think about the way Apple operates, there's 2 main dates in the year for Apple. There's WWDC this week, where all the new software is announced, and then there's the product launches in the fall, where the new iPhone is announced or launched. And these 2 dates are really tightly interconnected because when the iPhone launches, it's obviously when the software that was announced 3 months before launches as well. So the idea is, if you can be a developer, if you can kind of align yourself with that huge wave of Apple marketing that's going to happen in the fall, then you can put yourself in a really good position to get some type of attention from Apple, and kind of all the stuff that comes along with that, whether it's commercials, billboards, app store stuff, retail store stuff, all that stuff, right? So if you can use these next 3 months really smartly, potentially you can kind of you can get a little bump from visibility and or kind of really, in some cases, change the trajectory of your business. So that's kind of the point of this talk. So I'm going to start. So the first thing, whoa, sorry. the first thing, the first step to this is define. And this is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's like you need to find out what Apple is going to be focused on, what the company is going to be focused on. Because this really, again, puts you in a really good position to be able to do something over the summer. And so how do you do that? I'm here to tell you. So we're going to take a trip back to WWDC 2016. In WWDC 2016, there was a slide like this, where it says, this is iOS 10, and these are the 2,000 new APIs we're launching with iOS 10. And then the very 5 minutes later, Craig does a deep dive on these 10, right? And so, and then after that, when iOS 10 did launch in 2016, we see that a lot of the focus on the store are the features that are in those 10, right? Those 10 apps that they're focused on. So the idea is they talk about all these features that are going to be announced. Then they focus on 10. They do a deep dive, about an hour, talking about each one. And then that's kind of a signal for what is going to be they're going to put their attention towards. And if you don't believe me, 2017, same thing, different tint of blue shirt for Craig. And the features they're going to be focused on. And again, see, AR was launched this year, and this was the first week of the App Store, where basically the games in the apps tab was taken over by AR apps. So, and again, this last year, these were the features that were highlighted. Again, blue shirt. You got a formula that works. I guess they don't change it. And then this is what happened on the App Store the week of launch, where they're highlighting the Siri shortcuts. So brings us to yesterday. What happened yesterday? So yesterday it was interesting for me because the formula, I would say, was a bit different yesterday. They didn't do the big iOS 13 slide, but instead they did these smaller slides about different technologies. So this one, obviously ARKit 3.0, kind of naming all of the features that are in it. And so how do you figure out where to go from here, since the formula's changed a little bit? Again, that's what I'm here for. This is another slide on UI. Oh, by the way, again, this looks like it might not be a blue shirt, but it's definitely a tint of bluish gray shirt. It's consistent, man. The guy's consistent. So this is from a slide kind of calling out some of the features of Swift UI. And then we talked about, but I think one of the things that they did different this year that was just super interesting is that they talked about the consumer features. So in years past, we had all these features of iOS, of the new OS. Then we had the 10 that we talked about, and developers kind of had to parse out of those 10 what were features they could do things with, right? If you look at the years before, there were things like on that slide of the 10, there were things like screen time and stuff like that, which are features that are helpful and improve the OS, but they're not anything you can do anything with, really. This year, they talked about the kind of system features in the beginning. Then they talked about they talked about the tools that they have for developers to use. So you have like Replay Kit, you have Sprite Kit, these types of things that they put on a slide of for developers. So there was actually a section at the end, towards the end of the keynote, that just talked about developers, which actually makes you guys' job a bit easier to figure out what you can do things with. And in that section, they literally highlighted the four APIs they're going to do that are for developers to build for. So you got ARKit 3.0, Swift, Metal, and machine learning. But then they went a step further, and they literally tossed out Metal and machine learning, and they're like, yo, actually, we're not even going to talk about Metal and machine learning in the keynote. We're only going to talk about these two. So as developers that are building anything for the platform or working on projects, this is kind of a signal of what the company actually is going to be focused on for the fall. So this is kind of like They gave you kind of like a cheat sheet for what to do, which I think is cool. So yeah, fine. If I had to put my money on something to focus on, it would be probably these two. But then, like the next step, so we know what Apple's going to be focused on, and I think this is a really important step is to like identify. And when I say identify, I mean like identify which one of these are going to make this most sense for you, for your company, right? Maybe you're not doing anything in AR gaming or AR apps, so or maybe even not even anything that you can use the Swift UI for. So what can you focus? What makes sense for your company, your product? And so we went through last year. I did a bit of an exercise where we took that big slide of the 10 things. And again, a lot of these things are just kind of system updates. And I like talking to Larry's crowd, say, okay, out of these, what I would probably focus on would be kind of these four, right? Because these are kind of the things that you can build things for. You can build experiences for. AR Kit, you can do things with Siri shortcuts, do things with the new features, and then the new FaceTime stuff. And then, again, I'm like kind of like victory lapping right now on this stuff. And then when iOS 12 launched, again, there was you saw a lot of this stuff on the web. Apple was doing a lot of PR. There was a lot of folks that picked up the Siri shortcut stuff, and then even on the store, there were tons of stories that were written on the Today screen. There were collections that were launched, and so you see that a lot of visibility for these apps. So you look at these. Kind of the way Apple looks at this stuff is like, okay, they build the tools, but no one's going to see them if developers don't develop for them, right? So if you're one of these developers in these icons, then you're going to get a lot of attention from the folks. And some of these collections are still on the store right now. So you think about a year of extra visibility. It's pretty dope if you're a developer. Here's another one. It's AR Kit 2.0. You saw this type of stuff being written in articles and then on the store as well. You've got collections for immerse yourself for AR. Actually, right now on the store there's actually dedicated sections in both the games and the apps tab just for AR apps. So if you took any of those hints from the keynote last year. And integrated some of this stuff, it's likely you got some type of attention, or you at least put yourself in the running to get that attention. So again, to yesterday. So what do we do? As we're trying to identify what things make the most sense out of these, again, they kind of kicked out Metal and machine learning, but focused on these two at length. Then I was thinking like, okay, you have ARKit and Swift UI. And again, maybe some of these don't make sense for your app, right? So what are some of the other things they talked about that kind of most developers can use, and that I think also that Apple as a company will probably put a lot of attention to? Like there's only a limited amount of time in a keynote, so obviously everything can't make it. These are obvious, I think, because it made it into the keynote over even the stuff that they mentioned. But then also there's two other sections in the keynote where I think there was a lot of that they spent a lot of time on, and strategically as a company, I think they make a lot of sense. And that is the new accessibility features in both Mac and the iPad OS, as well as Project Catalyst. So that's where you can take your apps from iOS and iPad OS and bring them over to the Mac pretty easily. These are things I think, if you look at these kind of 4 features, I think it kind of covers the gamut where like probably most developers in this room that are building anything for iOS can probably use. And I think also the company in general, especially when I think about like Project Catalyst. And I don't know if you guys remember in the fall, there was an announcement, they did the services announcement, and a big part of that was the Apple Arcade. And a big part of the value proposition of Apple Arcade is you can play on your iPhone, you can play on your iPad, you can play on Apple TV, and you can play on Mac. So the first game subscription service where you can play on mobile, living room, and desktop. And that the games in that in that service are using Project Catalyst technology. So it's going to be a really big thing, I think, the idea of bringing these apps over in the fall. And accessibility has always been a big thing for the company. And they did a really good job of kind of driving that home with that like really dope video. I don't know if you guys remember about the guy with the that was using some of the accessibility technology. So again, identify what makes sense for your app. And I think if you look at these as a starting point, of course, if I had to rank them, I would say like these are like the first 4, and I would say Metal and machine learning are like honorable mention. So you've got 6 to start with. I think that's a pretty good start for you guys. So what's next is to integrate. So this is when whether you're using the native technologies like Xcode or Swift, or even the any third-party engines, I always tell folks to integrate and integrate now. And the reason why is because when I was working at Apple in developer relations, we would have WWDC, and obviously it's a grueling week, and we'd have the next week everyone would either be out of the office or dead or coming in at 11. And you'd have a week of kind of a lull after, but then the very next week, without fail, our director would send an email on the Monday and be like, all right, who's doing what? We want a list of people that are doing things with ARKit or Metal or whatever, and it's a week out. And we're like, what? A week? Come on, who's, what? But it really is like that. And inevitably, we'd have a couple developers that had left the keynote and ran into the lab and hacked up something that was cool. And we would start tracking those games and those apps. And we track them really throughout the summer. And why I say integrate now is for 2 reasons. Because if you can get on one of these lists early on, then you're on that list until fall. People, the Apple folks will be knocking at your door every 2 weeks, hey, can you get an update? What's the latest? Can we see it? Because the preparation for the fall starts really, really early for us, or it did start early for us. I have a problem with, I always say we, and I'm not there anymore. Try to have the best of both worlds. I'm always yeah, we. But anyway, and then the other thing is, I think if you're on any of these third-party engines, Apple has started to work with them a lot more than when I first started there. But it really takes for them to integrate stuff early. You want them to integrate as early as possible, but sometimes they need developers with pitchforks at their door, we need ARKit, we need ARKit, and then that's when they end up integrating it earlier. And the earlier they integrate it, the earlier you can test. I mean, we know how that world works. So integrate now, because it puts you in a good position, but then also allows you to kind of get the bits that you need earlier on, so you can kind of be in that good position. So next, share. So I know in the culture we're in tech, we're super paranoid about sharing things. We don't want to share things either because we think people are going to steal it, or we think that that we don't want to share anything before it's ready to be seen or by the public. But with stuff like this, I think it's really, really important to share what you're working on. Share with your test flight group. Have 10, 15 people, or larger, depending on how big your company is, just to get some feedback. But then also try to share with if you're lucky enough to get a contact at Apple, share with them early on. Share to them what you're thinking about. How you're going to integrate ARKit, or how you're going to integrate Swift UI, because that's the type of stuff they want to hear about early, and then it allows you to get feedback, right? It allows you to get visibility and feedback. Share on the web, and then share on Twitter or socials. One thing that I mentioned last year, which I think is super, people don't realize, and I think it's actually, I guess, illuminating, is that when we launched ARKit. I can say we because I was there at the time. So when we launched ARKit, they were a lot of the way we sourced a lot of the apps that ended up getting featured when we launched was through, there was a made with ARKit website that would post different things that people were working on, cool projects and things like that. And the bandwidth and the folks at Apple, there's you think there's a small army behind the App Store, and it's really, really small. So like they're looking for any types of ways or channels to get some of this information because they can't meet with everyone. So like our editorial team would literally scour every morning that made for ARKit stuff, and then they'd come to us and they'd be like, hey, are you working with this developer? Like, do you know this guy? Can you reach out to them? Because they wanted more information about what they're working on. And a lot of that stuff ended up funneling into what was featured when we launched. So share the stuff as much as you can. Put it out online. Put out like little projects that you're working on, stuff like that, because it ends up feeding back into the Apple folks more than you think. I think it's the same with there was a Siri shortcut website as well this past year that. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I don't know how much it was used internally. But yeah, stuff like that really helps these guys kind of find stuff. So share as much as you can. The next thing is to refine. So really, this means like just to like test and like test and test and like test. Uh-oh, sorry, went too far. I'll keep that there. Okay. Yeah, because it's super important. I think general practice, but also like when you're working with like pre-release software, it's changing all the time. I can't tell you the amount of times like I had folks that I was working with, and even though we always tell test on the latest beta, folks would like get stuff running pretty good on like beta 3, and they're like, okay, this is all right. Like, and then like we get down to like GM, and they hadn't tested since beta 3 or 4. And then they like, all right, I'm gonna submit, and everything fucking breaks. Oh, excuse me. Everything breaks. Everything breaks. My bad. G-rated. You can bleep that one out in the video, please. Please. But yeah, everything breaks. And so like, it's super important to test and keep testing on the betas. And then also, because you can feedback, like if things aren't working the way they should, like that's when like the engineers at Apple, they're like super like keen to get feedback because they want to fix things before like the GM. I think once the GM locks is really hard because there's not like there's not much updates to the OS that you can really get in after GM. But like when you're running like 15, 16 betas, like as much feedback as you can get to them as possible is the better it's going to be. The better it's going to be for you building your product, right? So yeah, test a lot and test often. Next thing is to prep. So this is basically prep your lunch. I know as like developers, like you tend to be either like really good at like code or like design or like you're like no one's great at everything. But I think a lot of developers just end up leaving a lot of the marketing stuff on the table, and then like just like I just want to build and design and like put it out there. But like it's super important to like think about like how you're gonna prep your launch, how you're gonna get demos out to people, who are you gonna email blast this stuff to when it's ready, what your art assets are gonna look like. Do a little PR. I mean, because yeah, you might not be great at all this stuff, but it really tends to count. Like it really. A lot more times than not, it tends to really make the difference, right? If you get picked up in an article or you get picked up somewhere online, it really helps. And then another thing is like the folks. There used to be like a time where like it's like Apple was like the end all be all for your product becoming successful, and I think it got to a point where like people were really just like my strategy is just to launch and get featured by Apple. And a lot of people like face planted it that way, I think. Either when they got featured, they didn't do as much as they thought it was gonna do, or they didn't get featured and they didn't have anything like to fall back on. And I think even if you meet with anyone from the Apple team and the App Store team, one thing they're gonna ask you is like, what is your launch strategy? Like how are you gonna roll this out? What PR are you doing? What are the resources you're putting towards this launch? And I think it helps them want to help you if you've got something planned out. So not only is it a good like best practice, and it will kind of help take your things further, and you never know, one of these things might pick up and snowball into the other things, right? But it's also almost like a requirement now. Like it's like going into like, it's almost like going into like an interview and like someone asks you a question, you're just like, like it's like, oh man, this guy's not prepared. So make sure you have some of this stuff. You have this stuff, at least some of these things taken care of, or I would say all of them. And then you're ready for launch. You've gone through the summer, you've done all the things you're supposed to do. You put yourself in a good position. You found what you need to, what Apple's going to be focused on. You've identified what makes sense for your product. You've integrated and tested, and you've prepped your launch, and then now you're ready for launch. And then, you follow all these things. Hopefully, you'll be one of these apps that gets some really good featuring, and hopefully, like, become rich and famous or whatever, or at least get to fund your next project, which is kind of like the dilemma that a lot of folks end up being in. And yeah, so that is pretty much it. Thank you for having me. I think I have my website is down here, Akil and the Akils. I have a bunch of just tips and tricks and stuff like that. Since I've left, I've been writing a bunch. If you guys want to check it out, it's not like a subscription service or anything. It's literally free. I'm just putting it out there because sometimes I get bored and I just write stuff. So yeah, thank you guys for having me. I hope this was helpful, and enjoy the conference.